Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I will be talking about the obligations and responsibilities of the sponsor in a spousal sponsorship. When applying for spousal sponsorship, the sponsor does have many requirements and conditions that must be met prior to the sponsored spouse obtaining permanent residency in Canada. First and foremost, before applying for a spousal sponsorship in Canada, you must ensure that you are in fact eligible to sponsor your spouse. Additionally, the Canadian government does assess whether the sponsored is financially capable of sponsoring their spouse to Canada. The reasoning behind this is to ensure that the sponsored spouse does not rely on any social assistance while in Canada. There are certain eligibility requirements that must be met in order to sponsor your spouse to Canada, such as the sponsor must be at least 18 years old. The sponsor must either be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident of Canada, or a registered Indian. The sponsor must prove that they have not received any social assistance from the Canadian government in the past, with the exception of disability. The sponsor must prove that they have sufficient funds to provide basic needs for the sponsored spouse. And lastly, the sponsor must sign an undertaking. Another important factor of spousal sponsorships is the intent to reside within Canada should the application be approved. In order to take responsibility over the sponsored spouse, the sponsor as well as the sponsored spouse must sign a contract that is called the Undertaking. The Undertaking is ultimately a binding contract that is signed by both the sponsor and the sponsored spouse, indicating that the sponsor will take responsibility over the sponsored spouse for a minimum of 3 years. The 3 years would start the moment that they receive permanent residency status and successfully arrived in Canada. The responsibilities and obligations of the sponsor entails financial responsibility and support for the sponsored spouse for the duration of the undertaking. It is important to note that the undertaking cannot be modified or cancelled at any point in time, even if the sponsor's life circumstances do change. For instance, if the couple decides to separate or divorce, or the sponsored spouse becomes a Canadian citizen, or if the sponsored spouse moves to another country, or even if the sponsor runs into financial difficulties, the undertaking will still remain in effect. It is essential that you have taken all of the information into consideration if you are a sponsor and would like to sponsor your spouse to Canada. Here at Akrami & Associates, we have dealt with many different immigration matters, and we have helped many of our clients reunite with their spouses here in Canada. If you feel like you would be eligible for a spousal sponsorship, please do contact us. With Akrami & Associates, there's always a way.